get to 100. It shouldn't take you long. But D9 is titled Linear Functions over Unit Intervals. It uses the word unit. That means you move by 1 unit. That's it, you just move 1 unit, because unit means 1. And it turns out that it's just talking about slope. I mean, it's really all this section is about slope. And we'll do a couple and you'll see that that's really all it is. It's just slope. So how does h of t change over the interval from t equals 4 to t equals 5? Now this is that funky function notation. When you see stuff like f of x or h of t or y of z, whatever, things like that are just fancy references to y. You need to understand that. It's just a fancy way of saying y. We're using function notation. So this thing is really saying, how does y change? How does y change as t goes from 4 to 5? And if you look at your grids, you know, they'll say that the y-axis is h of t. I know it's a little bit fuzzy, but you see it says h of t. And if you look at the x-axis, what do you see down there in the corner? T. So here's t equals 4. And there's t equals 5. What happened to y? What happened to it? Increased by what? 2. Now I couldn't actually, I didn't have enough. I couldn't on my screen. This is actually a multiple choice question, kids. And it's so simple, but they'll put things like increases by 200%. You know, it increased by 2. That's a choice. That's what you choose. Don't be that kid who thinks 2 is 200%. It is when you're talking about percentages, but you're not talking about percentages. And it did not increase 200%. It increased by 2. That's really kind of all you have to do. And of course, as you move up, what they'll do is they'll start working with negative numbers, because negative numbers are harder for kids to work with. They really are. So same kind of deal. How does y change from x equals negative 5 to x equals negative 4? So I'm just going to go plot those points. Here's where x is negative 5. I just kind of put a point on the grid. Here's where x is negative 4. I kind of put a point on the grid. And what happened to y? Decreased by 2. Now, after a while, they get away from graphs. That's all they do. They get away from the graphs. And what they do is they start giving you just kind of little simple word problems like this. How does h of t equals negative t minus 1 change over the interval from negative 4 to negative 3? Now, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to plug these numbers in. And now that's what we'll do. We'll plug in a negative 4. We'll plug in a negative 3. And we'll just see what happens. All right? I'm going to use function notation. Please do not let it throw you off. But h of negative 4, and most of you have started that lesson, means that you replace that t with what? Negative 4. So negative 4 minus 1, because I'm plugging that negative 4 into this function right here. What is a negative 4 minus 1? It is not a negative 5. No.
Negative 4 minus 1.
It is a negative 4 minus 1.
Negative 4, so it's a positive 4 minus 1 is 3.
Yes. Plug in negative 3, meaning we're finding h composed of a negative 3, which means everywhere I see a t, I replace it with a negative 3. So I have a negative 3 minus 1. It's 2. What happened as we moved from negative 4 to negative 3? We decreased by 1. By the way, what was the slope of h of t? 3?
Well, you could decrease.
Look at h of t. It's right freaking here. What was our answer? What was the slope? What was our answer? Decreases by 1. Probably a coincidence there. We'll do one more. So how does f of x being negative 3/10 of x plus 5 change over the interval from x equals 9 to x equals 10? I guess what I'll do is I'll figure out what f of 9 is. It's negative 3/10 of 9 plus 5. What do you need, Grant?
Numbers on papers. I won't get lost with clearing and go.
Anyways, negative 3/10 of 9 is negative 2.7. If you add 5, you get 2.3. Then I would find f of 10 by plugging a 10 in. Negative 3/10 of 10 is 3. You add 5, you get 2. What happened? Three tenths, yes. What was the slope of that given equation? Negative 3/10. Happened to be the answer, didn't it? Because you only moved 1 unit. So it's just slopes, all this is. So let's not do any math on this one, because you don't have to. How does f of x equals negative 1.3x plus 3 change over a single unit interval? What happens? Decreases by 1 3/10. So all you had to do on those questions is find a slope. That's really all you had to do. That's all it's about. All right, D10 is what we call the average rate of change. You guys ever heard of average rate of change? No. Have you ever heard of slope? Yes. Then guess what you've heard of? Average rate of change. Average rate of change is just another way of saying slope. It's the correct way of saying slope. Really, it is. Average rate of change is slope. It's a slope between 2 points or 2 intervals. Or there's 2 points. Because only lines have slope. Only lines have slope. So we kind of use the same formula, except we don't call it M, because it's not everything has slope. We're going to use the same formula. Now I'm going to write out a more complex formula. The average rate of change I'll not do that with you. We just stick with y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. I don't want to make anything more complex. Pre-calc class will try to introduce new notation, but there's no need to do that. It's just slope, kids. So here's one question. Find the average rate of change over the interval -1 to 4. Now, these are x values. That's what they are. From x equals -1 to x equals +4. If I have an x value, can I find a y value? How? Plug it in. going to do that. I'm going to create ordered pairs. That's all I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do, and this function is called k, I'm going to find k of -1 by plugging a -1 in. That says square of -1. What do you get when you take a -1 and multiply it by itself? +1, and multiply it by -6. -6. So we've created an ordered pair here. What was the x value? What was the y value? All right. To do slope, we need 2 points. We need 2 x's and 2 y's, okay? Now we're going to find k of 4. That's found by plugging in a 4. What's a 4 squared? 16. What do you get when you square that 16? Sorry, when you multiply by -6. Not subtract 6, when you multiply by -6. All right, just ignore the negative symbol for a minute. Will the answer be negative? Isn't 16, 10, isn't 16, 10, and 6? Yeah, 6 times 10 is 60, 6 times 6 is 36. 96 is correct because 60 and 36 make 96. So we just created another ordered pair. X was 4, y was -96. Now we just follow the formula for slope. Nothing more, follow the formula for slope. Average rate of change would have to equal, somebody set it up for us. -96 minus a -6, yep. Over 4 minus -1. I hope more than Anna can do that. What is a -96 minus a -6? That's a -90 because taking away a negative is addition. Why some juniors still don't have that in their heads is beyond me. What's 4 take away -1? Will that simplify? Yeah, it'll simplify. -18. And Trey, that is what you'll put in the box. So I don't think it's too hard of a thing to do, but some of y'all are just gonna kind of look at that and think it's Japanese. That's why my door says Japanese. And my little sign says that. You just don't have a clue what's going on. And I've got a couple more examples in here, and the only reason they're in here is just because you see different symbols. Oh, what's that symbol? Square root, all right? We'll figure out our order pairs. I guess we'll plug a 9 in. I'm going to find f of 9. That'd be -15 times the square root of 9. Spencer, what's the square root of 9? You don't know the square root of 9? You know the square root of 9.
What times itself equals 9?
Now, what times itself? No, 9's 81, son.
Oh, like, okay, 3?
3.
Yeah.
I'm being recorded right now. I'm just not going to say anything. What's a -15 times a 3? -45. All right. What's our ordered pair we just created?
9. Why are you multiplying it? 15.
Because what's understood? What symbol exists between the -15 and the square root? What symbol is understood to exist between the -15 and the square root? Multiply. It's like 3x is 3 times x. There's a multiplier in there. It's understood. Got to understand the understood.
I just don't get why you mentioned like the side and said times 15. 15 times 30.
I did. It's right there. Sorry. I'm going to plug a 16 in. Logan, what's the square root of 16? 4. Guys, what's negative 15 times 4? What's the ordered pair we just created? 16, negative 60. Why don't you guys figure out that average rate of change real quick? Sam, what'd you come up with?
15 over 7.
Negative 15. Negative 15 over 7. If you're not sure what happened, we just did y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Point and shown that a half dozen times. By the time you're a junior, like unless you just blindly copy somebody else's work, you probably should have done slope close to 1,000 times. I mean, there's no excuse for not knowing it. There's really not. Now, the only reason this problem would be hard is because there's a fraction. Now, I'm not stopping you from using calculators. I wish you wouldn't. And I'm not going to show this in class using a calculator because I wish you wouldn't use a calculator. Like, when you use a calculator, you're dependent on something to think for you. Kind of gets stupider. Well, I'll show you. It's not that hard. I don't think you should be allowed to get a diploma if you can't add and subtract fractions, but I'm not in charge, so I guess that doesn't matter what I think. I'm going to plug in that negative 16 first, f of negative 16, and it's as easy as just putting a negative 16 where the x is, isn't it? I mean, that's all you got to do. I'll show this with the calculator because IXL will accept decimal answers too. But I'm going to do it by hand first because notice it's got lots of choices: integer, whole number, fraction, or decimal. You have a choice here, you really do. And I'm going to find f of negative 6 by plugging in a negative 6. Well, that's 19 over a negative 6. Now what I did is I created the ordered pair negative 16 and negative 19 sixteenths. Remember, negative symbols belong in the numerator. I also created the ordered pair negative 6 and negative 19 sixths. So now I'll find that average rate of change, which is just a fancy word for slope. I'll do negative 19 sixths minus 19 sixteenths, minus a negative 19 sixteenths over a negative 6 minus a negative 16. Now the denominator is 10. You should see that. Negative 6 plus 16 is 10. Top's a little bit harder to do. You learned this lesson in 5th grade. You may not have learned the formula, but you learned this lesson in 5th grade. To add two fractions together, what do they have to have in common? The denominator. And most of the stuff you do early on is numbers like you can come up with nice and easy. They really are, because you're little kids. The smallest thing that 6 and 16 both enter is probably 96. Probably. Because that's what 6 times 16 is. I'm just going to use that as the common denominator. So in order to turn this into a 96, what I do is I give it a 16. I'm going to kind of do this up top. I don't want to mess this up. I multiply that 6 by 16, if I multiply the bottom piece by 16, what do I have to do to the top of that fraction? Multiply it by 16. Taking away a negative is addition. Now this 16 needs to be multiplied by 6. The numbers are a little bit on the big side. Negative 19 times 16, what I do is I use the number 20. 20 times 16, just maybe 2. 2 times 16 is 32, so 20's got to be 320. And then I take away a 16, 304. This is negative 304 over 96 plus, and 6 19s, again, I would use the number 20. 6 times 20 is 120, and take away 6. Just lost my train of thought. 114. Now, negative 304 and 114 aren't that hard to add. If you had 100, you're at negative 204. If you add another 4, you're at negative 200. Add another 10, you're at negative 190. What? Just math. Roll up the side. Do it by hand, son. How do you think I got so good at it?
Why do you think a calculator could do it that fast?
How many calculations can the human mind do in a second?
Over 2 million.
100 million.
How'd they figure that out? There's a lot of calculations.
They watch the brain fire off. Anyways, that'll reduce. Those are both divisible by at least 2. It's negative 95 over 49. Anyways, I expect most of y'all probably use a calculator in decimals, but whatever. Shortcuts I learned a long time ago is that division happens in the denominator. So you can actually move that 10 on up and change it to multiplication. This becomes negative 95 over 490. Both those numbers are divisible by at least 5. Negative 95 divided by 5 is a negative 19. And the other guy would be 99. No, sorry, not 99, 98. So yeah, good chunk of work there for that. I don't deny that at all. Hopefully I did it right. Now, what some of y'all do, and what most of y'all do, because I excel and house it, you'll use your calculator. So after you got your ordered pair, you would do y2 minus y1. And there is a negative symbol. If you're using a TI-84, there is a negative symbol that you have to use down here. I really wish you would use a TI-84 because your phones can't do some of the stuff we need them to do. Minus a negative 19/16. And there's a decimal, all right? You're supposed to divide that by the negative 6 minus the negative 16, which you ought to be able to do in your head. That 10. There's your answer. Now let's see if my math was right, because sometimes I'm wrong. Ooh, I was off a little bit. Ooh, I hate that. It'll say round, I think, to the nearest tenth. So you type in negative 0.2. But it does allow you to use decimals. So that's a bunch of fun. We got to go over this one because of the type of questions that are in it. Like there's an x cubed and an x squared. Those things are worth talking about. I'm going to find f of 5 by plugging in a what? Plugging in a 5. That's a 5 cubed minus 8 times a 5 squared minus 20. Now what? How do you do 5 cubed? 5 times 5 times 5. Don't be the idiot who thinks it's 15. Don't be that kid. That's 5 times 5 times 5. That's 125. 5 squared is what? Times 8. That's 8 quarters, kids. 8 quarters, $2. So that's the number what? 200 minus 20. 125 minus 200 is negative 75. Take away another 20. Negative 95. Created the ordered pair 5, negative 95. Find f of 9. Plug in a 9. 9 cubed minus 8 times 9 squared minus 20. I don't guess anybody knows what 9 cubed is, do you? That's 9 squared, son. You multiply by 9 again. 729. Did you do that in your head or did you do it with a calculator? 729 is right. Here you got 9 squared, that's 81. Got to multiply it by 8. It's 81 times 8. What's 8 times 8? What's 8 times 1? So what's 81 times 8? 648. That's 20. Now, the last two pieces make a negative 668. And you got 729. How far away is 29 from 700? 29. How far away is 68? Or 668 from 700? 32. What's 29 and 32? 61. Is that how y'all do math? That's how I do math. And then you find slope. I don't feel like doing another slope problem. But you can use technology on here. I'm not going to be kind of harping you over it. We did one fraction earlier. Let's do this one. This is one of those that you actually have to use a calculator for because IXL is not set up quite the way it ought to be for this, but you actually kind of have to use a calculator. I'm going to go over this one entirely in a calculator. I'll write it out, but I'm going to find f of negative 2 first. Hopefully I grabbed a calculator that's not quite working right. Bummer. This one opens up a set of parentheses. Not every TI-84 opens up a set of parentheses. If you have a brand new one, it will. If you use one of mine, it may not. But these pieces have to be kept together. All right? They have to be kept together. And you can literally just type it in. If you have an opening, you have a closing. That piece was negative 42. That wasn't a problem. The reason you have to use a calculator here is because of the next piece when you find f of 7. What is 7 plus 11? Is there a whole number square root of 18? Yeah, and IXL isn't going to work with radicals on this. So you kind of have to use technology on this one no matter what. It's about negative 59.397. Now, they say in the end you get to round to the nearest tenth. Don't do that in your intermediate calculations. Carry them out 2 or 3 decimals. I usually go to 3. That's the end result, okay? If you start rounding before the end of the nearest tenth, you might actually be off by more than a tenth. So here's our ordered pairs. We have negative 2, negative 42, negative 14, and negative 59.397. I'm going to subtract negative 42 from that guy. We can probably do the division part in our head. What's 7 minus the negative 2? 9. And there's our answer. Nearest tenth about negative 1.9. I didn't show a couple things, or a couple things are done in the calculator. And I watch y'all work. A lot of y'all just try to do all your stuff with no work on a piece of paper, so hopefully you understood what I did. If you don't, that's why you shouldn't do all your work in a calculator, because there's nothing to follow along with. But that covers D9, D10. We still got 15, 16 minutes in here. You should probably use it wisely. You're in here till 31, aren't you? 35. You're in here till 35, so yeah, you've got 18 minutes or so.